It's November 22nd, 2000. The Bush campaign knows something critical. They just need to run out the clock. They deploy their most effective tool. 30 white guys in khakis. This is the story of the Brothers Riot. How a handful of operatives stole the presidency with noise, optics, and just enough chaos to make counting ballots impossible.
And I started yelling, this guy's got a ballot, this guy's got a ballot.
People were yelling, screaming, and actually physically pushing and jumping right into me.
The Brothers Riot showed that sometimes elections aren't about who the people vote for, it's about who's counting those votes and who's breathing down their neck when they do. Today, we're going to talk about the events leading up to the so-called riot, what happened that day, and how events like it are becoming increasingly common. But before you can really understand the riot, you have to understand the presidential campaign that led up to it. Let's take a step back to June 1999. As Ricky Martin and Jennifer Lopez battled it out on the radio, Al Gore and George W. Bush announced their campaigns for the presidency. Gore was running kind of on Clinton's centrist playbook, but with a populist bent.
Al Gore. Too much like Clinton? Good for him. Good for us.
Meanwhile, Bush was running on tax cuts for the rich and the belief that presidents shouldn't insert cigars into interns.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
A fresh start for America.
Polls showed Bush ahead for most of the race, but his lead narrowed heading into election night. In 2000, polls and their popular understanding were much less nuanced than they are today. People didn't have Nate Silver with his fancy math predicting every state back then. Maybe that's why election night 2000 was the most confusing in the nation's history.
Before the election as the closest election in a generation, and we're going to see in the course of this evening whether, in fact, it already or will live up to its billings.
Between 7:50 and 8 p.m., every major network calls Florida a critical swing state for Al Gore. At that moment, Gore is probably celebrating. You can imagine someone offering Gore a cigar and him politely declining.
A fresh start for America.
But his confidence was likely struck short when later returns had Bush gaining on Gore in the Gator State.
Back to the too close to call column.
By 10 p.m., the networks retracted their decision and deemed Florida too close to call. For the next 4 hours, every other state was called without a clear national winner emerging. The election was up to Florida. Whoever won that state would win it all. But then, at 2:16 a.m., there was a glitch. Bush's lead suddenly shot up by thousands of votes.
George Bush, governor of Texas, will become the 43rd president of the United States.
Fox News calls Florida and the presidency for George Bush. Gore called Bush to concede, and Bush started his drive to his election night party to dance the night away. But there was a mistake. In what would go on to be called the Volusia error in Volusia County, a glitch at one poll suddenly showed Gore at negative 16,000 votes. That's right. Negative votes. This incorrect value was tallied up into the state-level data, which was then used by the networks to make their projection on the race. County officials began tracing through the data and saw the error resulted from just one machine, and they corrected the tally. The networks would retract their calls and Gore his concession. To this day, the Volusia glitch is a question mark on the election. No one is really sure how it happened, but later demonstrations on the exact same machine replicated the error after human intervention.
I think we, as election officials, need to be a little bit more demanding from the vendors as to the technical specifications of this equipment.
But that's a story for another day. In the morning, the elections board reported Bush up by about 1,700 votes. Since the margin was under 0.5%, an automatic machine recount was triggered. After the recount, Bush's lead shrank down to 327 votes. The lead was so narrow, the campaigns could then ask for a hand recount to be done in specific counties.
No matter what the outcome, America will make the transition to a new administration with dignity, with full respect for the freely expressed will of the people, and with pride in the democracy we are privileged to share.
Republicans even accused a Democrat of stealing a ballot.
The Gore campaign sued to do a hand recount in the most urban and the most democratic county in the state, Miami-Dade. When the recount started in Miami-Dade, it was immediately contentious. You see, there was a big issue with the ballot design. When a voter would attempt to make a punch, it would not register properly. Sometimes they wouldn't punch all the way through. Sometimes the Chad, that little piece of paper that's supposed to be punched out and discarded, would hang on by a thread. This meant that when these ballots went through the machine counters, their votes weren't registered.
What are you going as?
A hanging Chad.
Nobody remembers what the hell a hanging Chad is.
What a sad commentary on our national attention span, that we could forget such a turbulent time in our political history.
Some 10,000 ballots were cast with no presidential candidate selection registered. That meant that when it came time to do the hand recount, there was a lot of room for interpretation as to a voter's intention. And this was no simple task. Each of those 10,000 voters would have to be identified by a poll worker who would attempt to interpret the true intention of the voter. Bush's campaign was watching the process happen. They saw that as the hand recount continued, more and more Gore votes were being logged. And they didn't like that. They decided that if the counting wasn't going their way, they needed to stop the count. If you can't win on the numbers, just win on the environment around the numbers. Republican operatives put out the call for congressional aides and campaign staffers, people who knew cameras, floor politics, and message discipline. These weren't random locals. They figured if the public thought the process looked chaotic and messy, the public wouldn't support the process. The status quo would prevail, and any additional counts would be rendered moot.
An impromptu protest by Republicans in the lobby of election headquarters.
Imagine being one of these ballot counters, trying to suss out the motivation of some voter you've never met based off of whether a piece of paper is appropriately dimpled. Not to mention, you got 10 lawyers breathing down your neck and national news cameras broadcasting your every move to hundreds of millions of people, eagerly anticipating the news of who their next president will be. With all this pressure, the canvassing board that was operating the count decided to move to a smaller and more private room. It made it easier for them to do the count, but it also made it easier to claim secrecy and to pack a hallway right outside their door.
Republican protesters chased after them, demanding to see the process.
Security tried to keep a perimeter. Tempers flared. A Democratic official carrying a sample ballot got swarmed. Cameras caught the commotion and sent it nationally.
This is the most brazen attempt by the Gore people and the Democrat machine and the thugs in that building to hijack the American presidency.
Inside, the effect was immediate. The canvassing board recessed, then reconvened, and citing time pressure, logistics, and safety concerns, voted to stop the county's full manual recount. The disruption didn't legally end all recounts everywhere, but practically, Miami-Dade, the biggest bucket of potential Gore gains, was off the board. The spectacle had done its job. Cable news ran the hallway footage on loop, and the public marinated in mixed messages. The GOP turned confusion into a political resource. The more complex the process looked, the more palatable it became to end it. All of this played out against the court's clock. Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris, appointed by Governor Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush. Where do I know that name from?
The candidate's brother was the governor of Florida. That may have had something to do with it.
Really helps. That does help.
Please clap.
Anyways, Harris enforced certification deadlines. On November 26, Florida certified Bush's lead, but the fight kept climbing the ladder. On December 8th, the Florida Supreme Court ordered a statewide manual recount of presidential choiceless undervotes. But the next day, the U.S. Supreme Court halted the counting. In Bush v. Gore, the court ruled that differing county standards violated the Equal Protection Clause, and there was no time left to establish a uniform remedy. The practical result? The counting stopped. The existing certified margin, Bush by 537 votes, stood. What would have happened had those Republican staffers not crowded the election board building and delayed the recount in Florida? Would Gore have gained enough votes to win the presidency? Would Bush instead be the one making documentaries about climate change? Well, maybe. There's no guarantee that Gore would have won the recount. And besides, when the margin is that close, you can point to any of a million different earlier events that, had they not occurred, the result would be different. It's certainly possible that enough votes would have been counted by hand for Gore to win in a recount, but that's no guarantee that the recount would have been certified. Ultimately, what happened that day in Miami, the so-called Brothers Riot, shouldn't be understood as the pivot point, but as a data point in a trend of declining faith in our electoral systems. Consider it a warning sign that some people don't trust the system so passionately that they're willing to make a lot of noise, maybe push someone, maybe do other things to get what they want.
Please clap.
That's it for today. I'm Chris Tresson. If you have a comment or perspective, I'd love to hear it down below. See you next time.